Today we want to talk about embodied spirituality and perhaps a new way of looking at spiritual attainment or personal growth that is different from the traditional ways or the mainstream ways of looking at it. It's a very interesting topic. It's a topic where I do approach it with a bit of trepidation. At least I have to figure out the right words to say, to be able to express it, to be able to explore it. So I hope this conversation will serve as our own exploration and perhaps something useful for the audience as well. Let's start with embodied spirituality. What do you mean by that?
We first of all have to understand the revolution. We are already children or the beneficiaries of major change and shift in our approach to spirituality. It's already crazy to speak about embodied spirituality. Just the term, it's like nitroglycerine, more or less. Those things were kept apart in our civilizations for many, many years. Like we're talking about 2,000 years. At least since the birth of Christianity. And to an extent with the development of philosophy from the Greek schools, particularly the Platonist school. So the body was the bad place. We spoke about this. So how can it become a spiritual place? Most of us don't ask the question anymore. How did those things that were kept apart can suddenly come together? And it's not that I have the answer. I just think that the question is extremely important for us to explore. And we should go there. We spoke a lot about healing. Our civilization is scarred. Just to make it very plain, most of us come from religions, monotheistic religions. Whether we are believers or not, we are heirs to those traditions. And they made a separation between the spirit and the flesh. Everything up was spiritual, everything down was fleshwal, bodily. And this split has torn us. Spiritual was not in the body. To a large extent, it was renouncing the body. How do we now come home? Okay? Science in the modern age made another split between the body and the mind. So we were mind or mindful creatures, hopefully, and spiritual creatures. But the body thing and the flesh thing was getting in the way, or were getting in the way. Now it's not the case. How did this happen? Okay, so first of all, let's just take a broader view of what happens in civilizations with knowledge, with learning. That many times things that are kept apart meticulously on the pain of death suddenly merge, and there is huge revolutions in the process, and a new world is being opened up. Yeah? Galileo, for instance, in the 15th, 16th century, was persecuted by the church. His major sin was connecting together the mathematical sciences, which belongs to the heaven, with the physical sciences that belongs to the earth. For us, it's not a problem. The entire Middle Ages were struggling with that problem. And suddenly these become one, mathematical, physical sciences. For us, we learn it now in school. People were burnt for that. We don't grasp the enormity of those processes. Now we do the same thing with spiritualities. The spirit and the flesh were kept apart. Now we are starting to bring them together. Wonderful. Thank you. Just to be aware of the process, of how far this is reaching, and how happy we can be that we now grow in these times where we are allowed to bring in knowledge and crafts and possibilities and methodologies to link these two together. And the potential, just like in science, when physics and mathematics suddenly were wedded together, an enormous explosion of knowledge occurred that was before kept apart. Now we are bringing those two together, and spirituality and embodiment start to live side by side. I would still say that each one of us is still struggling with it, but the potential, the seed, the allowance, not allowance, but the permission to bring them together is already there, which is huge. So embodied spirituality is another journey, another aspect of the journey. We don't just develop perception in general, we are also interested in asking the meaningful questions about our lives, what we used to relate to as spirituality. Healing becomes a spiritual art. It's not just fixing you up and sending you home with a bill. Healing starts to take on a form that I really appreciate, that goes beyond therapy, as we said, beyond learning, into a kind of a personal initiation. How does it come about in our personal lives is the subjective part of it, a bad word, subject, but how does it come to be expressed as a collective, as a social thing, is also wonderful, very, very important. Coming from the healing professions, we usually do it in the working room, right? So we are one-on-one, or we have a little workshop, or we have a little course. But it's hard for us to imagine what would it be if people in the world, in Berlin, Europe, elsewhere, would start to look at their bodies as an oracle, as a universe within, as the bridge out of which I connect to the people I love, to the people next to me, how I start to enrich the world, becoming completely unique like my DNA or my fingerprint, and yet sharing the same nature, same environment with others, not competing with who is what, because actually each one of us is completely different. Those are the questions on the collective scale. And in the private scale, in the subjective one, the real feeling of the spiritual experience is actually an expansion of consciousness. I call it perception starts to expand. Every time we do this, we feel something special. We talked a little bit about silence. One example of it. So when you become silent, you feel that your space, even for thinking, for listening, for perceiving, starts to become broader. This is sort of a spiritual experience. It can be in different ways, in different modes. And for each one of us, this, I think, would be the calling. How can I expand beyond my limitations today? Many times we call it personal development. I have issues, I want to go beyond them. There is a healing therapy, psychology, touch. But the aim is for me to grow. Not to grow in my weight, in my girth, in my financial power perhaps, but grow in my human value, grow in my perception, grow in my ability to communicate. Yeah? So this growth is actually a spiritual experience. And we can touch and go. You know, we can be silent for half an hour and then we go to a rock concert. Fair enough. And every time we do this, there is another taste of it. The crazy thing about the body likes it. And this is one of the things that drew me in. Because I felt how my body loves this when I trained in it. And then I studied it and then I was teaching it. I felt as if the body is spiritual. in a very deep sense. It loved when I expanded. It felt very quetched, squeezed when I tried to twist myself into things. And I sometimes can twist myself into things in order for a noble cause to be better. And this is old school. Let's get rid of the body to be spiritual. Or let's squeeze now the body and get rid of it in order to concentrate on the exam. We do this. But every time there was really this experience of the moment, the here and now famously said, the body was on board, facilitating the process. Attention was lucid. Perception was exhilarated. And you expanded a bit. This is the place that you feel the spiritual experience. Now, you can harness this for religion, which can be wonderful and hopefully peaceful nowadays. But by itself, even without the book, even without the icons, or without a special mantra or prayer, spirituality is actually already inherent in our experience. Children are spiritual without going to church. I remember as a child, having very deep debates with God. My mother was terrified because I was going at it. I was not happy with certain things. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of debates. How do you get it? Now, I grew up in Jerusalem, but not necessarily in a practicing Jewish family. It was very easygoing. It was the 60s. So, how do you get this? The children have it. Very, very interestingly. And they feel, and certain places mark an impression on them. So, somehow the body is happy to expand. And it's happy to merge with perception again. It's like the marriage of heaven and earth. There was this old poetry by William Blake. You might have it from the Tantra tradition, naturally coming in from the sources of the culture. We now benefit from those knowledges and crafts and techniques and methodologies and approaches. We come from the other side. This was not allowed. It was not just the foundation stone of culture. It was the prism. Yeah? So the marriage of heaven and earth, the marriage of perception and the body, and to see that it works.
Very interesting. A lot of things stand out in this for me. So I'll try to put the picture together and then zoom in on a couple of aspects. So I also grew up in a Muslim family, not very practicing, or not in the sense, not very imposing, let's say. So I had the freedom to make up my own mind about things. And I had all my thoughts as well, and then I forgot about it as well, and I took on some of the ideas of monotheistic religions. I don't want to say just Islam, because in a way Islam was continuation of Christianity, which was continuation of Judaism. One of the first, most well-organized, well-controlled religions, monotheistic religions, because there were some before that as well. Mm-hmm. And those are organized versions of spirituality in a way, because it is about connecting people with the divine that we called God. But there were also traditions before that. So when we talk about the old school, there are older schools than the Judaic religions or monotheistic religions. And some of the earliest written accounts of that go back to India. So along the way, there were some other traditions, the Romans, the Persians, but going further back all the way to Shiva and his predecessors, the original yogic traditions. And there already you start seeing this rift. So the thing that was organized by Judaic religions, that body is the place of sin and dirty and something to be transcended in order to reach the divine that is somewhere up there or outside. In the yogic traditions, you see this as well. As you mentioned, you have a lot of ascetics, a lot of yogis who are renunciates, who pain themselves in various ways to control and almost mutilate their body in order to reach higher realms. But even before that, if you go further, you have the original yoga. I mean, what was Shiva thinking? Talking about self-knowledge and expanded states of consciousness while doing some amazing physical exercises. You don't hear stories of Shiva mutilating his body or giving up on life. The stories you hear, the stories that are, perhaps some are true or some are amalgamations of different Shivas, are about this guy who's in touch with nature, who's in touch with his body, who has figured out ways of experiencing his body that are uncommon, and doesn't talk so much about the mind, doesn't talk so much about the thoughts, or it's almost as if they're irrelevant, and it is through the body that he was reaching the divine. And
how far are we talking about?
We're talking about 6,000, 5,000 years, so 3,000 to 5,000 before Christ.
Fascinating.
And you have traces of these different philosophies along the way. So in yoga, there's the Tantra. Within Tantra, you have Tantra Samkhya and Tantra, etc. Tantra Samkhya would be the naturalistic Tantra. Then you have Brahmacharyan traditions, which are the disciplinarian traditions that start with modulating or moderating behavior before you go on to be in touch with the divine. So fixing yourself, preparing yourself before you can even enter this sacred space. But if I go all the way back, it seems that the earliest accounts of connecting with the divine are, in a way, really just about connecting with the divine that is always there, more about rediscovery or discovering one's own self, and hence this idea of self-knowledge, than achieving something as part of a trained tradition and controlled tradition. So you have you as a person who could just connect and then train in various ways to make that experience more accessible to you, or to be one with it in a way. And then along the way, there's, I guess, the law of large organizations comes into the picture, where the more people who get to know it, there's kind of a little bit that everybody knows, and few people know all of it. And then in order to, because the interest is high, you train more teachers, and then those teachers know maybe 80% of what the original teacher knew. It starts to dilute, and then you start seeing people who don't quite get it, or who, if you tell them you are already one with God, the rest is just discovery, get intoxicated with this idea, and then become very highly functioning psychopaths or sociopaths, or because there's a sense of power that comes with it. It is very empowering to have such experiences, or really have that conviction.
It can be easily misunderstood.
Yeah. And it seems that's kind of the trajectory that these religions later on much more codified in a much more controlled way. But even in the yogic traditions, even though people would not call it a religion, or Buddhism, some people would call it a religion, but originally it is not a religion. It's a set of ideas that you embody in your own way. It seems that a lot of this religion was this attempt at controlling the dissemination of this information and understanding while preserving hierarchical social structures. So keeping the chaos under control while giving people a little bit of that. And then if we take it closer to the modern periods, you mentioned Galileo, that's only 600 years ago. So 600 years to Galileo, about 400 before Christ, 500 before Christ, when Moses found the commandments. That was roughly 500 years before Christ.
1,500.
1,500.
Very.
So very interesting situation, right? So for me, Moses goes up the mountain and comes back with 10 commandments, half of which are about behavior. Not so much about connecting with the divine.
Yeah.
But that's what's coming from the divine, which is a very interesting story in and of itself. Of you connect with the divine, and all you get is don't screw around, and make sure you pay back your debts. So what's happening here? What I'm trying to get at is, are we talking about, in a way, going back to the knowledge that in a way we already found and then got corrupted? Are we talking about rediscovery of spirituality in its original forms? Or is there something new, something evolutionary that is coming up now, where we are perhaps rediscovering the physical aspect of it in a new way that wasn't there before? Can we somehow put this picture together?
It feels intuitively to say that all three.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, but this is really deep. Amazing. So, one process to understand is that it's beautiful how far in history you go, but there was indeed a time where there was no conflict between or within us. We were part of nature, and it was okay. Let's say the paradise mode of it. There was no split. The splits, again, just to make it very simple, of the axial age, this is the time of history that at least Europeans refer to the Eurasian process of separating the transcendental from the terrestrial, or the immanent, the heaven and earth. This split was splitting us as well.
Yeah.
And this appears in the Asian, Indian, Confucian, Persian, Judaic, Greek, and later on Roman worlds. And they created this split of you are a divine spark within a fallen body. You are part of heaven within a fallen natural world, in different ways. And you are very correctly putting the finger on the institutionalization of the entire split, and how do you build the bridge to overcome it with the priestly castes and the different palaces and shrines and perhaps ashrams and sanctuaries that were responsible to deliver a trickle of that spirituality down to us. So there was a unity, it became split. The split started in the times of the Greek philosophy. It's not only because of them. It's not. I'm not trying to point a finger too much, but it was a very deep agent of disembodiment and the spirituality as something above. It went very strongly with Christianity, and some of the tenets you already find in Second Temple Judaism. Anyway, it was a major split.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the culture continued that split, and actually, the most extreme split was starting to come together at the time, around 400 years ago, with Galileo and then with Descartes, the 17th century, that the body-mind became entrenched. So the separation was not so much about the cosmic order, but it became, again, a separation of body and mind, with the Cartesian thinking. Now, to answer the first question, we are completing, in a sense, the ills, perhaps necessary ills, of history to come back to a place. And this is why it's so important to have these talks, because many of us are born into these hippie traditions without really understanding how important it is what we do. How important is it? Because we now complete the cycle. The people that are now struggling with the body, that are drawn to embodiment, that are coming for sessions, that are trying to deal and to expand their horizons, to make their lives better. It might be on a personal scale, a personal phase that they do, but they are part of a very, very, very large process in our human evolution of trying to come back home. These salmons that are going upstream. This is where we try to now struggle. And we don't yet have the way, I would say we don't even have a paradigm of how the human experience is. That's why I'm struggling with perception, embodiment, and attention to try to create a framework where we can start to look into this and not struggle about opinions, but to start, first of all, to have the framework in our own being. This is where we want to get to. So it's as if there was, let's say, the Shiva time, or the Indus River? Indus River.
Mm-hmm.
Cultures, those very primordial cultures that didn't have an army and didn't go to wars and didn't really understand the concept of it.
So we think.
And they had this split. We inherited this with our monotheistic religions. Gradually it went again to another phase in science, but still coming 2,500 years later, we are starting to merge them into one. This is part of how we come back home, and I would say our entire civilization is like a patient. Our entire civilization is like a client. Each one of us carries this split within us, and we try to come back home to heal. And I find it beautiful. The second thing that you mentioned, and correct me if I understood you right, is there something about spirituality that is different from how it was to how it is now?
That's a question, is it?
Question. Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I think we will never be able to fully answer because we are not then, and we are not there. We are here. But I think the nature of spirituality changed. And I would like to approach it from not necessarily how we experience our spirituality, but how we express it or display it into God, into the divine, our concept of the divine. Humans we have a tendency to have a human face on things, anthropomorphism. So we try to create an image of the divine that somehow fits us. Now look how interesting this is. We come from very long traditions that we felt very ignorant. So we were sure that God is in a different position. God knows. God knows everything. It's the knower, the big knower. We don't. Religion tried to go there through prophecy. Philosophers through philosophy. Science still tries to do the same thing. How can we know everything about everything? How can we predict? It's a technological version of the same fear. I am ignorant and I don't know. Now, just like I challenged you in our talk about attention, about the body-mind, that instead of a theoretical problem, we can start to look at it like a civilizational break or rift. We are sick. It's not a philosophical issue between the body and the mind. It's a call for help. It's dissociative. We spoke about this, which is a great, crazy way to look at things. I would do the same thing here. And I hope my ancestry, the Levites of Moses, this tribe, will be lenient with me. We have this obsession and belief that God knows everything. Could it be that we are now approaching a spiritual phase where we are not that ignorant? We might still be, but it's not so much the issue. And God, as a position that's supposed to reflect it, would come to us with the other side. That God doesn't want to know everything. Just like our quantum mechanics, we start to see that much of it is not predicted by knowledge. It's also not oppressed by knowledge. That the whole fun is not to know. Could it be? Then we have an entire different spiritual vision of what our approach to the divine is. That maybe the last thing it's interested in is to know everything.
It's very interesting. All of it is very interesting. I think I will say this 100 times in this episode. So I like this idea in the sense that it brings together two aspects. One, it shortcuts this traditional understanding that religion sells, which is that either God knows everything and can control and decides on how things go, and we will never understand it, right? We have to accept the mystery. I'm not sure if it was Epicurus or somebody else who said, if God knows everything, then why, and God is all-powerful as well, why doesn't he or she prevent disasters where children die? Has the knowledge, has the power, so does that make him evil? So is he evil? Is he benevolent? And there's a number of questions that come up, but the way you describe it, in a way, the divine is more interested in a continuous process of self-discovery that emerges, that shows up, that gets known by some parts of it, not necessarily the human part of it, not necessarily conscious parts of it, but it is happening, and it is not fated, so to speak, which puts us in a very interesting place where we don't have much of a confirmation of anything. And if I think about what religion has been doing, it has been selling us convictions, confirmations. It's been selling us, if you do this, you will be okay. If you do this, you will be forgiven even if you did something wrong. If you pay enough to the church, you will be fine. If you stay in your terrible relationship, God will still forgive you, because God does not want you to go living a total life of independence, but more something that benefits the group. There are some very good ideas, but sold in a way that is very assuring. If you stay in line, everything is going to be okay, and you will eventually get to live in a heaven where you have everything good that you could ever desire for. No constipation or anything. You could consume as much as you like. There would be no pain and no suffering.
In the Jewish version, you're allowed to eat non-kosher food in heaven. This is more or less what they allow you.
Very interesting.
But it feels like some rabbi, smoked the wrong thing at the wrong day, because it's not very appetizing. But it's just very funny.
Yeah, it is funny, and it speaks to what you were saying. We are anthropomorphizing the divine, coming from a place of that there is something that is beyond us that we do not know, but we are interacting with it on a day-to-day basis, to starting to learn how that something works from really a phenomenological point of view. Clouds, rain, why does it rain today and not tomorrow? Prayers, sometimes it works, so let's keep the tradition going. We have been kind of finding our ways to interact with this beyond, the great thing that is a bit out of our control. So it's not so much that it's beyond, it's all around us and inside us, but that we cannot control it. And we have been learning a lot, and we have been going more and more towards this control thing.
Yes.
That is then sold by religion as well.
But also by technology.
Also by
technology. Also by science.
Yeah.
They pretend to be enemies, but we will see that they agree on too many things.
They do.
Suspiciously.
So this arc you were drawing, if I think about it, there was a moment where there was perception in its most innocent form, let's say, and then thought starts to become stronger and stronger. Not that it was never there. I guess thought started from the very first label we put on something. There's the reality of it, and there's a name for it.
They say even when we started to trace animals, the image of a trace on the soil, where it goes, and the sign language of hunters to be quiet.
And so thought is essentially representing stories, right? It's a way of communicating stories, whether internally or externally, and that seemed to have been getting stronger to the point that we were more thinking about the divine and more thinking about the perception, or more thinking about our experience, and not so much actually delving deep into the experience. And nowadays, when we, as you said, now it's body, mind, thought, and spirituality. When we talk about connecting with the spiritual realm, or a spiritual experience, we almost always talk about silencing ourselves. What is that silencing? It's not that you stop experiencing the body or the world. You're silencing essentially the story that is running in the background all the time. So I do agree with you that I think that there was a bit of overemphasis. It's like overdeveloping a muscle at the expense of the rest of the experience or the rest of the health. The thought became so strong that now we almost have to consciously try to bring it down to allow space for the rest of that experience. So, thought, body, mind, attention, perception, spirituality. I also want to add in a couple more ideas in there because we talked about the Judaic religions and the ancient Indian traditions. I grew up in Pakistan and I was aware of the ancient traditions, but I grew up more in the Islamic way of thinking, let's say, or thinking about life and the cosmos. So I had to rediscover that as well. But I was also very my mind opened up a bit more when I tried to learn about the history of religions and learned about all these other religions or ways of connecting with the divine, about the African tribes who once a year go and shout at the gods. It's a very anthropomorphic, human-like connection, but not so much the devotional connection that you find in a lot of the Indian and Judaic religions. It's very much eye to eye. There's a ritual around it. Once a year, I get to shout at you and complain about everything that you have done wrong for me, and ask for certain things. Then you have the Aboriginal traditions, the Australian Aboriginal traditions, where you have this long-standing tradition of going on a walkabout, which is, to me, it is a spiritual ritual. It is reconnecting with yourself and nature without the noise of the stories of social structures around you. Wow. And then you have the Amazonian traditions, where you have people who do have stories of the beginning of the cosmos and the beginning of the human race and so on, but they are also not devotional. They are not sitting down and praying to these gods. They have a lot richer spiritual world in a way. For them, it's much more animistic. That everything has this spirit, the plants and earth and so on, and so do the people, and they just work with it. That there's a very symbiotic relationship between the person and the beings beyond the human realm. These beings are almost as powerful as any other gods of previous years. So there are these traditions, and to this day there are still traditions where there is a very non-devotional, normal, natural, non-aggressive connection with the spiritual world that is not controlled by the mind. Mm-hmm. And I feel almost as if what we're talking about is we are at a point where we can consciously see the role of thought, give it its rightful place, not negating it altogether, but not putting it on such a high pedestal either, giving more space to the actual experience that is very much physical, and then kind of walking our way through the uncommon experience of being towards the most exhilarating experience of being, which is by definition the most uncommon of it all, where people connect with the divine, with the God and so on. Does that kind of put it together that we are in an age of balancing and exploring from a place of self-sovereignty, as you called it earlier?
Beautiful. You raised so much content that there is a lot of this to bite into. And it's very true that the spirituality is an experience of expansion. If you go out to nature and you have a journey, you feel transformed. That's what I meant. As if there is little deltas, like in mathematics, when there are differences. You come slightly different, you come more. deeper, transformed. This, I think, is the place where we can feel the spiritual at work in us. When we silence ourselves, the same starts to expand. Now, if we don't look at the divine as an old man with a beard in the sky, and we start to reconnect through ourselves, through our attention, through our embodied experience, through the flow of our energies, we expand through ourselves, beyond ourselves. That's the beauty of it, and I think this is also part of this spirituality. So I think spirituality is gradually transformed. This is the second phase of what you mentioned. We start to approach it differently. It's not anymore an act of devotion. In certain circles it is. There are beautiful prayers, beautiful music, beautiful liturgic compositions and texts. If you open the Psalms, it's amazing. And I know it also from the Sufi traditions. There were people that were doing the devotions also on different levels. You know? And this is the changing face of spirituality. What has changed is our metaphysical view. We don't see it anymore in the old school way of logical thinking is correct thinking or the divine thinking and so on. We look at perception and thinking, we start, at least in new ways, in spirituality as well. We are starting to see a different cosmos. For instance, you mentioned causality. We can have a narrative about why things happen as a cause and effect, but specifically in the helm of science, at the very edge, cutting edge of science, causality collapses to a large extent. So we start to see that it could be that it's not anymore a cause and effect. It might be different. How does this transform our spirituality? We are now starting to revisit the concept of prayer, of giving thanks, of cutting the before and after, giving thanks, for instance, for something that didn't yet happen, but as if it happens already. So we enter ourselves into a spiritual dialogue for giving thanks, not just out of devotion of begging and asking for something, but actually thanking something for the process that it's already coming into being. That's a very different aspect of it. Another aspect is the community sense of it. With Buddhism, there was the responsibility of the individual, even if it was in different terms, for their spiritual unfoldment. It was less a communal thing. You can create a group of monks and do the prayers together, but it was, you have your own struggle with your development. For us, it's a very modern experience. We come from communal religions. So we went in the last centuries through this process of having an individual and the cosmos and the feeling of being alone that we still feel in society, and the feeling of being responsible for what I believe, what we have as human rights. Yeah, our society displays this rather lonely and subjective or personal individual take on spirituality, and we also respect it in this way. Now when we start to bond again, people search for spirituality that can involve their own journey, but they want also to have it in a group. Sometimes it works, sometimes it can really go over, like with sects and so on. Mm-hmm. So, but the wish to share it is once again connecting us. So again, spirituality changes from the seeker that was once part of a huge army of believers into a very individual, personal stake at it, and then now reaching again to find how to connect with others. What I find very interesting in this is that if each of one of us now taking hold or caring for their own spiritual development and seeking how to connect with others without necessarily having the right dogma or the right credo to believe in, but to have this expansion next to others and allow others to expand into their being. This, I think, is the new place where it's going to happen. Because again, the body is unique, your spirituality will be unique, your perception will be unique, but it doesn't come at the expense of anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I benefit tremendously from our conversations, yours and mine. And without that I have to be you, without that you have to be me. It's precisely the differences that make it so wonderful, and then we can expand together. This, I think, is where it should go. Now imagine this on millions scale of people, or imagine this on communal scale, that people can do it without necessarily we have to have the same ideology.
Mm-hmm.
And those ideological issues and metaphysical issues and belief issues and credo issues you can find replicating themselves independently of religion. It's crazy. Like 100 years ago, I know some people personally from our family were devoted communists, completely atheists, anti-God, for the workers of the world, willing to kill, willing to die for the cause. Total ideology. It can play exactly the same role like religions without having even God intervening in them. And we can see this in so many different schools. I think we are now coming to a phase where this doesn't make sense anymore. We have grown up. There is a beautiful saying by Bill Maher, he's a moderator in the US, he says, and then something really happened to me. I graduated 3rd grade. So we have grown up, we have matured. We cannot squeeze ourselves back to those bottles.
Mm-hmm.
We have to expand the bottles. Or we have to go beyond them, and we have to start to find that the fact that you can be spiritual by doing certain practice, and I can find my fill doing other practices, by the way, could reflect the fact that my struggles lie elsewhere. It's not my truth above your truth. It's my pain that needs to go there, and your experience that has to go there. And we are both in a process of healing, and it's still one world. And if I manage to conquer my fears and deal with my trauma and open my heart, this will feed into the big ocean of spirituality that you can wonderfully go into a different direction, and I can benefit from your triumphs. This, I think, would be the more relevant way of looking at spirituality, that we are balancing ourselves rather than trying to be a monolithic army of regimented believers that very much goes old school. And this, I think, will be a very important thing to have, and also in our global world nowadays. You know, we cannot even imagine, we still talk in funny terms. It's not anymore first world, second world, third world. We live in one neighborhood. The third world person that you imagine somewhere might be the person that you meet in the grocery store. And the first world citizen might be your neighbor that just rented an apartment coming from the US for 2 years of university studies. We are merging. What does it mean for our spirituality? If I would like to keep Shabbat, and I go out to the street and everybody is happy bouncing around, and I rub shoulders with my lovely neighbors that are Christians or post-German East DDR culture, they have no idea what are we doing with those funny things, and I have no idea about them. But because we are now all the time on the surface, and it's partly also with the tension that we experience nowadays, part of it is how do we bring out our spirituality in new ways that we don't have to be the same, but we can at least be allowed to live side by side and benefit from this. You know, I had this funny, just recently, I was not aware so much about the Ramadan traditions and the Zuckerfest, what they call here in the Turkish tradition. But apparently there is a day in the end of Pesach, of the Passover, the Jewish Passover, the 8th day, that you can celebrate that you are allowed to eat again bread. And they do this bread with a lot of honey. I don't know if it's very healthy, but they enjoy it very much. And one of the children said to his mother, "Oh, this is like a Jewish Zuckerfest," because he knows it from his Turkish friends. Now, we don't have to become all the same, but we can really benefit from the same environment and find ways to enrich one another. And this is really, I think, part of this vocation of where spirituality could take us. It doesn't have to go backwards. Usually things never go backwards. But we can kind of approach things with new questions. And having it through our bodies, make it very personal. Spirituality, when it became very institutionalized, was not personal anymore. It was almost algorithmic.
Or bureaucratic.
You have to do those steps and then you get this benefit. Yes, I agree. It's completely bureaucratic, and I would even say it's not fully moralistic. Let me challenge ourselves again. With something that I'm deeply busy with. If you make a deal with God and you make a deal with your employers, what is the morality difference between the two? If I will be a good boy and I will get a bonbon, the morality is conditional. What does it mean? Just like I go to my employer and I would like to have a raise because I was working nicely and extra hours. Now I want to have this. It's the same kind of deal. Do we want a spirituality that is based on a deal? Is God, or whatever the divinity that we imagine, is the employer of our souls?
Or the master, right? It's kind of a slave-master tradition.
Wow. Okay. So then everything is conditioned, and conditioned upon a deal. Is this moral?
Not to me.
Is this spiritual?
Yeah.
That's what I would challenge. How would it look differently? Maybe you can go along these lines, and how would you see a different moral structure that is not based on a deal, that actually I do the good because I will reap the benefits, not because of the good itself?
Yeah, one of the concepts that I struggled with as a child was the idea of punishment, like heaven and hell. Was very interesting for me. Why would God send somebody to hell? And of course, also in normal life, why would you punish somebody when the deed is already done? Essentially, the idea of punishment is you kind of keep that person out of society so that in a way they don't get to do more damage. What if somebody says they have repented and they will not do it? What if they will never do it again? Somebody uses a drug or gets into an accident and hurts somebody. Why would you put them in jail? They don't do that intentionally. In a way, that's also to send a message. This is how we organize society, and we do not tolerate that, and we are willing to sacrifice the individual for that. So the idea of heaven and hell and punishment and this kind of a deal where there are incentives and punishments for not conforming is really a very human way of organizing society, of bureaucracy. And it seems to me that religion played a big part of it, religion and politics, right? Organizing society, taking spirituality from which people were in some way already kind of getting a bit more disconnected. So it had become impersonal. It had already been outsourced to the priestly class.
Outsourced is a powerful word, yeah. Yes.
And we kind of did it on our own.
Confiscated, yes.
Yeah. Taken over. And then that connects with the aggressive powers that be, really physically aggressive, right? Because they can put you in, lock you up in a house at the very best and kill you at the very worst. that kind of took us in a whole different dimension. And if I think about now reclaiming spirituality as a personal cosmic experience that is not necessarily mediated by or governed by certain deals
or institutions,
it changes in character. It really becomes this personal cosmic that that is separate from how you organize society. You might still need agreements on organizing society, but there are definitely no bounds on the experience of the divine. The current religious tradition, in a way, puts certain boundaries on it. You have to qualify to go to the next level. You have to be approved. You have to be certified to go to the next level. But from a personal point of view, that's just certificates. You could have that experience in one instance, or you might take 10 years, whatever your experience of that is, and you might take different lessons from it, as you say. We can be very unique. We are very unique. Your rituals would be different. The way you would market, the way you would show your respect to this, to the rest of the cosmos, let's say, would be very different. And so the thing that comes to my mind is every time we talk about this kind of unlimited experience of spirituality, which is
unconstrained,
yeah,
unfettered,
which is how I think it should be. It threatens the existing system, because the existing system doesn't know how it would deal with those kind of individuals. Imagine
mutants, almost
mutants,
yeah.
Who feel empowered, who are willing to debate, at the very least, or not take orders from somebody who hasn't gotten their story straight. So it's a lot of free people, and we wouldn't know how to organize that, right? So there's a lot of fear in the system, and also within individuals. Yeah. So my journey, kind of taking on all these different understandings and then integrating that, had very clear moments where I was like, should I approach this topic? Because if I approach this topic, if I think about heaven and hell a little bit deeper than I have been, I would be questioning a very established tradition that is also the law of the land in a way.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of fear in that, and I just want to acknowledge that there is that fear, and we don't know. It's real. We don't know how we will deal with it.
Yes, and in different society, the cancellation or the censorship or the reward and punishment and the discipline is done in different ways.
Yeah.
So in some traditions, it can be more violent or more visual. In other traditions, even today, nowadays, many people speak on social media and the way people are reflecting on political correctness as part of the punishment of not thinking the correct thoughts. So it's still with us. Sometimes more visibly, you have flagellations in the city center. Sometimes slightly more, I would say.
It's becoming a social outcast, right? Like
people are losing friends.
Yeah.
Because they change political views, for instance, or they came out of the closet with a certain thing about themselves or about their sexuality or about their gender. And it's very touching to see how much courage this requires. So we pretend to live in a free world, but I would put it in brackets or check it. I completely agree with you. And there is a question of how far do we go? And there is a personal journey of spirituality to define my way. And always also remembering that I might define my way now because of a specific phase in my life. And I might need to define it later. So there is also a temporal or duration to this commitment that I'm doing, like a vow. Because for my healing, let's say, I need now to go through something, to explore something. It might be a bit weird, might be strange, but it also might be a phase. And then I have to re-summon again and consider my path. This is part of responsibility. I think it's beautiful. It's not wrong. Spirituality is not any more permanent. It's a little bit like we said before about God. God is permanent. God knows everything. Everything is cause and effect. These are almost, I would say in the next centuries, our conversation will look like child's game. This is childish thinking. And we know it, in fact, to be wrong. So, how does our spirituality benefit now from these looser constraints? To answer one poignant thing you mentioned, how do we deal with those free people that they don't start to go la la la? It's very interesting to experience this with people that have gone beyond the normal consciousness experience. When they come back, and they come back transformed, usually they don't become serial killers, they don't become awash with greed or with lust. They are usually going around the world with a broken, loving heart. They could hug people. They go on workshops. Like you have some people that went through near-death experience or those kind of experiences, came back transformed, sold their company and started to build almost a spiritual school. Mm-hmm. Or they have these kind of talks to let people know, to share their story, not as a new credo, but to benefit the larger audience with their struggles and what they've been going through. So usually those free people are not so bad. Depends which kind of freedom are we talking about. Mm-hmm. Of course, if we speak about people that are just going tech crazy and they need to conquer the world, there is no difference between this if it's now Elon Musk or one of those types of people mm-hmm. that look very interesting but slightly worrying, or the AI revolution that we are now witnessing. The need of anyone to control the world, if it's a crusader or if it's a high-tech nerd, is worrying. It's not so much about the content, mm-hmm. yeah. It's about the tendency. I would even go a step further. The need of anybody of us to live forever. And now we have it also as part of the tech promise of the Homo Deus by Harari and others. Mm-hmm. I hope Harari doesn't see it as a good thing, but he describes it as a future, that we will be able to live forever. This is how a cancer cell functions. They don't die. Mm-hmm. So now we look at this as a divine statement, that we will be forever. Funnily enough, when people go through that door, they come back transformed, and they know, in fact, that some of us go on, or some form of us goes on, and some of our perception is actually...
Yeah.
It's just not in this particular body, or in this particular phase, which raises the question of how embodiment feeds into all this. Mm-hmm. But these free people, they usually, when they have a spiritual experience, they don't become so evil. They usually become more empathic and heartbroken. And many of them are coming back and say, oh, if I would know this when I was still a normal person, so to speak, it would change my life.
Yeah.
So this is one of those things. A second thing about controlling and ruining or trying to go now on the rampage of whatever, this is, again, it's exactly what cancer is doing. And we have it now institutionalized in our economy. Mm-hmm. Endless growth. If we could, we should.
Yeah.
This is how a tumor thinks. Mm-hmm. I take all the resources, I'm going to expand into the entire organism, I kill it on the way, nothing stops me. This is how our economy thinks. Okay, so part of us is really, really sick. Mm. And we look at it like growth. This is a tumor, baby. That's not a real natural growth. So this forever thing, this knowing everything, we have it now in our little devices, as if the internet knows everything, Facebook knows everything, the NSA knows everything. It used to be the image of God. Mm-hmm. And now it happens in our tech. And we want to be forever. All these things, I would say, are not the face of spirituality, and I don't think they are the dangers of spirituality. They are the dangers of our, but deranged way of thinking that many times came from our minds rather than from our body. The body would know that endless growth means that you explode, you die.
It's sad and funny at the same time, because it seems almost as if we have been, the way we operate human beings, that we are almost in a war against God, or in an attempt to surpass God or become God fully ourselves, to be fully in control, to do as we please, make our own rules and not be governed by the rules of the gods of the past. And religion is almost secondary to this movement of the human race, where religion now has found its place just kind of guarding some of the doors of access to God. But we have this in ourselves to kind of keep pushing, or enough of us have it, because we did mention we still have cultures that are much more at peace with the world and with themselves, and are not as consumerism driven as the rest of us. But I'm glad you mentioned, I'm glad we got to the topic of this spiritual transformation, because I do want to now emphasize the positive side of it, and talk a bit about how that experience unfolds. In a way, you already mentioned it. It is this expansion of being, and finding your place in the world in the most authentic way possible, and that puts you at peace. That puts you at ease, and then from that place, when you interact with everybody else, you're not, you don't want to disturb anything, really. You even put up with a bit of oppression as it is, to give more space to a bit of peace emanating from your being, and work from that place rather than destroying any existing structure to transform it now to become, everybody becomes like you. It is a very tolerating position to get to, because you have found peace within yourself. I feel that on this journey, as we mentioned, this kind of strengthening of the mind and thought structures and society based on thought structures and ideas. So growth, or in other words, control of resources, is a mental model that we have fully espoused in most of the world. That is what is driving the economy. Following the law, most of the time really good idea, but we have had many examples where the lawmakers have been oppressive. We have seen the Holocaust, we have seen millions of people.
80 years ago, you and I most likely would be already incarcerated.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
By our girlfriend.
Yeah.
Otherwise they would face death sentences.
I mean, 80 or 100 years ago, we wouldn't have the relationships we would have.
Yeah.
It would be very hard for the two of us to have a conversation and mention half of the topics, or 10% of what we have mentioned just in this conversation.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't be able to sit in Germany, being a brown-skinned person.
Me too, as a Jew.
As you, and same for you. So we have kind of seen the negative aspects of mental models taken to the extremes, and some of those are really strong. And when we talk about the spiritual growth, which in a way is coming back to yourself and finding peace, we do have to let go of a lot of these chains that bind us, these chains that hold us down, that we are dragging, that slow us down. Hopefully in a way that is sustainable and increasingly healthy, but some people reach that through crisis, whereas at some point they go like, all of this is bullshit, and in that moment they find silence, and they find their place and connect with the divine, and then continue to function. I would love to talk about that process, and perhaps from you personally as well, and I'd be happy to share my story as well, of how that grows, how that changes, what do we deal with when we go on this journey. Because like I said, for me, the beginning was really starting to question some of these mental models, that it's okay for some, divine being outside of us to just send people on a whim to heaven or hell because they professed to believe in him or not. I'll tell you the story. One of the most important questions along this journey early on was, I grew up in a neighborhood where we had Christians as well as Hindus. Very lucky of me in Pakistan. And we went to the same school. Some of my teachers were Christians and Hindus, some of the best ones, and my friends, childhood friends. And the father of a friend of mine, he had his shop and some business, but early in the morning he would get up every day, ride his bicycle, take 2 buckets, go to these public water pumps, pump the water, and then put it into these public water jars that were there for people to drink water from. We're talking about Pakistan. In the summer it gets hot. Mm-hmm. That was his public service. Only a handful of people knew about this. His family and people who were close to that family knew about it, that he would do this. And at some point I was like, wait a second, so I believe in the Islamic God, the Judaic God, the one God. And apparently that God doesn't like it when people don't believe in him, that when they believe in different gods. And he's going to send the father of my friend to hell because he professes to different gods, to Krishna and Rama and others.
Okay, they were Hindus.
They were Hindus. Mm-hmm. But the father of my friend is one of the best people I know. He's just giving and giving without asking for anything in return. He's a very peaceful person. He takes care of his family like anybody else. He plays his role in the neighborhood. One of the most kindest and caring people I know is going to hell just because he believes in a different God, whereas my God, which is supposed to be the creator of all beings, including him then, is just going to abandon him and put him through a lot of pain and suffering. And some of the other people who are total jerks, who believe in my God, are going to heaven just for believing, and not for their behavior. So, interesting story, and the story continues in many different forms. But it was starting to question this mental model, this thought that was planted in me or that I had taken on. And then over time it grew to many different things. How do we consume animals, for example? What does that mean for us? Our place on earth, our place in relation to other people who are not even in my neighborhood, who have very different beliefs for a long time. And we know this has happened for hundreds and thousands of years, where people said people were blaming Jews for everything. And so by the time I was growing up, Jews were running the world economy, and they were, toppling governments and all for money, And I was like, but that doesn't make sense. It's kind of, so I had to really rip apart a lot of these thoughts that were just kind of there. Mm-hmm. And with that came a bit of that expansion.
This is the spiritual growth. And you can see also the grappling.
Yeah.
And the pain, because it's tearing your world apart, but you start to grow beyond some of those cages of the mind that we are growing with. And it's very important to question them. It's not necessarily that they are all wrong, but at least you can question.
And it's interesting, 2 things that come to my mind. You mentioned people come back a bit heartbroken, or heart-opened.
Cracked.
Heart cracked. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, right? And that's my experience, right? Because you, in a way, by going through this struggle, you open up a bit. It's painful, but that actually allows you to connect on an even deeper level. Before, if I think back to before, I was disconnected. I was connecting according to the laws of the land and the ideas and the thoughts, This much we go, this much love we afford to this other person because of the beliefs or the regulations that we have. And you come out of that and there's this bittersweet feeling to it where you really now can love existence and connect with it. knowing that there's a lot of work still to be done, and the way we live most of the time is not necessarily the way you feel anymore.
Yeah. Wow. I think part of the growth that people nowadays feel is that they need to expand. And this is almost a spiritual impulse by itself. Again, if we look at ourselves as living amidst this infinity, and eternity, being finite and being mortal, we are expanding into something endless. This experience with the endless, even if you expand a little bit, it's in the right direction.
Yeah.
So infinity is in the right direction, funnily said. And each one of us coming from different perspectives. I think you're a very kind person. Some other people that are more angry and violent would say, if this is the case, then everything is wrong. And I have to break free entirely and
burn the whole house down.
Yeah, burn the house down. And it's very interesting to see people do it in a different way. But the way is to expand and to start to question. And I think what we are going to find, and if people listening can also consider it for themselves, is that we have been playing with dolls. Our concept of God is a little bit childish. It comes with the wells of inspiration that I definitely was there. These people felt very, very deep things and experienced very deep things. And I don't even need to argue with them. But it was, at least in the case of the Hebrew tradition, the Israelite tribes, like the remnants of this are considered today Jews. But this origin appears on the stage, we now even archaeologically know, as believers in a very specific God. At least 3,400 years. Like this is the beginning of the Iron Age to the transition to the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. So with all due respect, we can start to see that we are heirs to this tradition, but we also have to grow and to mature and to allow a transformation to occur in our spirituality. So it's a little bit like we played with little toys and we loved them, and it's our childhood memories, and now we start to expand. So, for instance, we can go into a spiritual world where God doesn't play by cause and effect. We have a little music here. Pashel Bel Canon is playing for us. And what does it mean if God is not interested in knowing everything about you? Much more the surprise in your being. Just like a parent. If you think of parenting, we would like our child to be a copy of ourselves. Like this, my daughter is exactly like me. This is slightly sick.
Yeah.
It makes me worried when I hear parents talk like this. That I think that we are in different layers and in different aspects of our lives called for growth in different ways. And there are places where the mind is holding us stronger. For some people it's about belief, for others it's about values, for others it's about tradition. It can be different things. Or knowledge. This is how you do it. And we need to expand. That's what we also spoke about perception. With the embodiment, with attention, perception allows us to go one step higher, broader back. And to really have the big questions. Attention will focus on stuff. But perception is the real one that goes to the well, to the source, and asks the questions and starts to see it in broader sense. And we are infinite beings and we are unfolding. And some of our places are, for instance, with trauma, with disease, we are caught in very narrow, bloody difficult struggles. In other things, we can be excellent. The gap is huge. So I can have, let's say, somebody who can be a master in playing the fiddle or the violin, and can be the meanest person with their handicapped sister or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the same? No. There is a huge gap. Certain civilizations, the same, might be extremely well off with certain traditions and certain values and might be doing very well, and at the same time being completely stuck, if not traumatized, with certain mind issues, collective mind issues now, or beliefs and so on. And we need the healing to be adapted to the place where we are. And with the divine, with spirituality, I think it's exactly one of those places that it calls us for now to really start to rethink. Again, we go back to think, but to re-perceive. What is for us this spiritual thing? And I very much suggest this expansion, but it's not that I have an ideology about it. This place where you start to really experience, well, now there is growth happening. And this is so beautiful because it's life. Life is growing. You are now growing with it. Let's say that you are in flow, in the movements training. You really feel now you are coming into this zone, and I feel expanded. I feel growth. I feel grown. I feel that I go beyond my limits. This is my manifestation as a human being. This place is the place where spirituality converges with personal development. And if you do it alongside others, you benefit others socially. And we start to bring a benefit to the world by mere being human. Before we download and upload and whatever load.
Yeah.
This is the place where spirituality calls for. And it's completely fine for us and for our listeners to see what here I am still very much stuck. I cannot give up on this. Let's say the romantic belief that every pot has a top, or that I will find my love once and for all, and there will be this perfect happiness forever, and this Disneyland thing. Some of us find it very difficult to give up on it. All right, but at least me, I know that I have this little Cinderella within that still hopes the prince will come.
Yeah.
Okay. Or I go like this to Christmas and look for my presents. Or if I will be a good boy, I will get a chocolate. It could be that I'm stuck there. Never mind, I could be extremely gifted in running the company and whatever. And I still want my little chocolate because a part of me still believes that it'll be good in the end.
Yeah.
This is part of our detection, to see, okay, where are we? Where do we want to develop? Where do we want to grow? Where does it ache us? Where do we feel that this limits me now? I cannot really go to the next level. Something is wrong. I really have to give up on this. And it's a process of negotiation.
Yeah.
Almost like an addiction. Coming from the Jewish tradition, for instance, just to mention one of the very painful issues, is there is a complete misunderstanding about the issue of being chosen. It's heartbreaking. Very few idiots, among my people, still believe that it's a symbol of status. It's a status symbol. It's actually exactly the opposite.
Being the chosen people.
It's a service. You are taken for a service, for a purpose. The priestly families, the tribes, the Levites that we belong to as well, my family, were the ones chosen for a specific purpose, to serve. You're actually a servant, what we used to call public servant or civil servant. This is the service of this particular mission that you have. It's not above anything. You see how it can be taken in this way. And many groups also within Christianity were starting to ask themselves about being chosen again as if it's something elevated. It's the opposite. It's the something beneath. It's the servant. It's the caretaker. It's a very different idea. Now, people that are busy with this, and they look at it like a status symbol, for instance, would find it extremely difficult to give up. And the beauty of the Asian traditions is that by giving up or letting go, you actually evolve. So there is a very different aspect of it that can benefit also the struggles that we have in other civilizations. So this is just as an example. We have very personal struggles in very different levels. So usually we try to show ourselves as good, to be attractive and to get our likes nowadays, whatever that is. And then we try to show the good side.
Yeah.
But we know, who are we fooling? The real struggle is usually here. Like, with this arm, I am a racer. This one, I'm a little bit handicapped. Where do I need help? We constantly broadcast the wrong messages.
Yeah.
And this is also typical human and typical. It's a failure in the system of how we believe about ourselves. So if this is this side of my nose and this side of my nose, I'm trying to bring this, I'm trying to bring that. I'm all the time faking it, pretending to If we learn to let go of it, or if we learn to have a safe space, sanctuary, to expose those weaknesses and to say, I really have a problem. And this is like the Alcoholic Anonymous, the AAA, that you say, okay, we have issues. Now the real thing starts. Now the beauty of it spiritually is that when you are able, instead of to fake the brightest side, if you are able to attend to the weaker part, then there is a growth of the entire system. But this is usually not where we are going.
Yeah.
So spirituality, I think in this case, converges with personal development, with us going beyond our limitations, with us helping others, serving others beyond their limitations, not judging and not measuring.
Yeah.
But actually kind of growing together when time is ripe, not necessarily forcing it. But somehow understanding that it happens on different levels. And in different traditions, it happens in different ways.
Yeah.
And religions also, they have their issues. They have their traumas. If I look at Moses, if I look at Muhammad, if I look at Jesus as the figures, okay, never mind that it was differently done in history. They were traumatized and they were facing very difficult challenges in their times, their entire generation. But people also, the way that they fashioned for themselves and their inspiration comes to meet them where they are, creates the religions that later on we see that the founder's personality very much imprinted in the traditions that they create. A bit like the child and the parent that says, this child is exactly me.
Yeah.
I love her so much. Please, let them go. So in a way, the traditions that we create, and that's a danger today as well, in sects, in guru circles, the imitatio Dei, the concept that I have to be like the divine person, starts to clone me in the shape of another. This is almost a crime against the universe. We don't yet have an international tribunal of this kind. But there is a wonderful Talmud saying in Judaism that when the Caesar of Rome, under the occupation of Rome, and when they make a seal for the coins, all the coins come out the same. When God creates human beings, none is alike. I like the second version. And I feel as if it's really what we need. So it also means that our spiritualities can grow together and they can be interwoven, but they are unique. And by the fact that they are unique, we can speak about spiritual biodiversity, perhaps, if it's not too crazy to say, that when you become silent and when you meditate, I can benefit from the atmosphere. And I can become silent or meditate or train in my way. And we can do it side by side. And it's not one on top of the other. We are growing and mutually benefiting one another. This, I think, is where we are going, where we need to go. So spirituality will less be a credo or a belief or something that everybody has to be the same. But let's say that we can change one more little thing.
Mm-hmm.
We can change to believe into perceive.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's face it, if you give a true believer, look person, whoever you are, you can now continue to believe for the rest of your lives whatever it is that you already believe. That's the final destination. You're doing it fine. Go ahead. Or you can now open your perception to perceive, not to believe, but to perceive. And when you will perceive, what you will come to meet on the other side might change your life forever, including benefit your spirituality. What do you choose? So almost like the matrix between the blue and the red pills.
Mm-hmm.
I think most interesting creatures will choose the second, to perceive. And then we are shifting from a spirituality that is belief-centered, and belief is always coming after perceiving, just that there was a prophet perceiving for you.
Yeah.
There was the leader telling you, this is how it's supposed to be. Now you go in believing this. And then you become your own agent, your own prophet, your own spiritual leader that you can now perceive directly. This could be perceived as a threat. I understand what you mean. For instance, Jeanne d'Arc, a 14th century military leader afterwards, started by having visions. You have visions of the deity talking to you, that it doesn't go according to the church. That's heresy.
Yeah.
It must be controlled. It's not the content of what she saw. It's the fact that she was allowed to perceive it. It's the priest that's supposed to mediate to you what is the right thing. I am much more for the second version. And then each one of us might perceive differently. But there is nothing there that we can really struggle about, because just like our bodies and like our attention, like our perception, it's in the same infinity. We are one, but we are not the same, as this song goes by U2. It's a wonderful song. We are one, but we are not the same. How wonderful. This is the new. And I hope we can have a world where people can come transformed and come to be spiritual in their way and expand in their being and benefit one another, rather than having the idea that we have to dominate one another. It remains to be seen. It's an interesting point. I didn't fully think about the danger of this thing, but you're right. It could go this way. And some part of us also wants there will be a nanny and there will be a mummy. And in my case as an orphan of war, there will be a puppy that will tell us. By the way, Muhammad was an orphan, and I think it was also part of I can understand very much the impulse and the need and the search for it. Yeah. So there will be somebody, a caretaker, that will know all the answers, that will predict and will give us the recipe and the algorithm or the bureaucracy and the deal of how we should run our lives. Because we do need it in specific cases. I think it harms us in others, and it's not easy to tell the difference. But this is the challenge of our spirituality, I think, for the future.
It is, absolutely. Existing systems, I think the way I would summarize it for myself is that they are based on almost an addiction to control. And so naturally, anybody who frees themselves or allows themselves the luxury of at least perceiving freely before choosing what to believe or what to do about it is already seen as a threat. We have all these laws about traitors, from religion and government systems. So there's a lot of that, and I think just in our own person we also have a bit of an addiction to control, which stops us sometimes from perceiving fully. What I would highlight for anybody listening, for myself as well, is that you kind of have to you have to accept that you will have to deal with these kind of ideas in yourself before you deal with it in other people. But that's the only way. In order for you to perceive freely, you have to accept that. You have to free yourself of anything that is holding you back. And I think that the starting point can be anything. The way I would formulate it for myself, or these days how I formulate it for myself, is the point to start exploring from is where something does not feel quite right. Whatever that is, whether it's just in the body, in the mind, or spiritually, or if you think that something is not quite right with the government or the system that you work with, and that's a good enough starting point to start to explore why is it that it doesn't feel right. Previously, at some point, I was thinking maybe I should say what doesn't feel good. But I think we have also a bit of an addiction to dopamine, so we can easily go like, oh, this doesn't feel good. This is a bit of an uncomfortable conversation, so let's just stop the podcast and go have another cup of coffee or go have food. But perhaps more, what doesn't feel quite right in myself? What is it that is, and then finding that little bit of peace. And that is the expansion that can continue onto many other domains. What I also, the reason I come to this point is I was wondering, how would someone know that they're in the right direction? And so the opposite of what doesn't feel right, if you get to something where you go like, this feels right, then you expand it. Mm-hmm. If you go from this doesn't feel right to 10 other things that don't feel right, okay, you still have a bit of work to do. And usually that is the case because everything is all interconnected. But every time you feel, now this feels right, it feels right to believe that my friend's father is not going to hell. It's more likely that the belief that I have been given is wrong, given all the facts. My friend's father is definitely going to heaven because, according to some of the other standards, he checks all the boxes. And so, that kind of, let's get to a little bit more right, that feels right, not right and wrong. And then the second question that comes to me is, okay, if I follow this, this is okay, it's a fair bit of work, and I'm the sort of person who starts with the mind first, and now more and more with the body, and open perception. Where could I get the inspiration from? Because we are also very used to getting that inspiration from the prophets, from the leaders, from the family elders, from traditions, philosophers,
celebrities. Mm-hmm.
And the two places that right now are the source of my inspiration for kind of the helping this mode of thinking, perceiving, feeling is to take inspiration from the cosmos and the non-devotional, non-oppressive cultures, because that's where I have the least baggage. There are certain ways of thinking about our place in the universe and the universe itself there, but they're not so laden with sin and suffering and you being right and wrong that it still allows for a bit of a space for feeling and perceiving. And if I think about it, the universe, for example, it just is. It is, and that already feels empowering. Okay, it is okay to just be.
And you are part of it.
And you're part of it.
You're a participant.
That there are forces that are pulling at you, that they have a contribution, that things are interconnected. You have the sun and the moon, and yes, the sun has solar flares, but without the energy, we wouldn't be here. Like our entire existence would not be possible. But it's not just the sun, there's also the earth. And if it wasn't earth in the place that it was, and with the composition that it was, and the hits that it took from all the meteorites, we also wouldn't be here. So the cosmos is a great source of inspiration that is not so commandeering, and it's not forceful at all. It's just there. And then if I think about these indigenous cultures in particular, most of them have a very easygoing connection with existence. They exist, so do the animals, so do the plants, and they benefit from them. And yes, they sometimes cut down the trees, and sometimes they have to kill an animal, but they're not out to just kill everything and build their houses. They're much more in a symbiotic and flowing relationship with life. And that feels like, okay, that is a source of inspiration. Is that how I feel when I live in Berlin? No, I have a much more transactional way of being. In fact, I also have certain social pressures to maintain a certain status, to pay certain bills, to be able to buy certain coffees, and for that I do this work, which leads to stress. So I think some sources of inspiration can help kind of this journey of expansion. Whereas if I would take, let's say, as opposed to that, if I would take, we are in Germany, so German way of being, let's say, let's take the middle mainstream, then okay, I need to work. Well, I need Haftpflichtversicherung, I need Krankenversicherung, ideally I want life insurance, I have to be able to pay the bills on time, I need internet and TV and access to a car. For all of these I need to work a certain amount of time, just any job wouldn't cut it. So suddenly, if I take my general orders of being from the German system, my life is just way more complicated on top. Or if I take it from religion, then according to one religion, I should be fasting for 30 days. According to another, once a month, or every 24 hours. According to another, 7 days, and then I get to enjoy life. According to another, every 7th day of the week, I have to ask somebody to turn the lights on and off because I am not allowed to touch it. It just adds all these crazy complications. What are your sources of inspiration that somebody who is interested in these in this expansion and growth, that they could lean on?
Interesting. So just to make it very, very simple, it's a beautiful background of how you present it. We can expand into priorities, let's say. If we seek to expand and it feels already by itself a right direction, right, left, right, wrong, but a relevant direction, a natural direction for us to unfold, I would ask 2 questions. And I think we need both answers. One question is, what is already bubbling within you? You say it's a bit like you have a certain issue that disturbs you, it doesn't feel right, or feels bad. I also can relate to it, and I can say that there are certain things that I really feel that I have a burning question with. There is something unresolved, let's say. Not just intellectually. There is something unresolved. It calls for, it's already bubbling. And usually those places are the places that we are aching, that we suffer in. And we need to expand. Now, the expansion itself doesn't include necessarily the answer, what is the right thing. But you feel here, I feel a little bit squeezed and I need some space. I would like to grow here, to expand here. This is usually when people come to sessions or to work and to personal development, work with something that makes them suffer, let's say, in general, something uncomfortable. And there is an expansion in this direction. And the other side is expanding towards things that we feel that we can already learn to get better and better in. And we are challenged, but not necessarily because something feels wrong. These are the 2 directions, I would say. Like, one of them would be to grow in order to transform something uncomfortable that usually I would run away from, and now I want to expand into and to go beyond. And another one is something that I like or I enjoy and I'm already mastering to some degree, a craft, a possibility, and then I would like to take it to the next level. In both of them I'm challenged. challenge in a good sense, yeah? Sometimes with more suffering, with more fun, but both of them are really, really relevant.
Yeah.
Let's take an example. You might say, okay, I know how to meditate. I've done it for many years. I can reach silence. Now I would like to challenge myself and reach more, deeper. Silence with regards to something. And I would like to develop my listening and my ability to enter this realm that I already know, but I would like to go to the next grade of school or the next level. I have another thing that, for instance, could be a very painful thing in my relationship or painful thing in my body, something unresolved with my family, something I am ashamed about, I'm embarrassed about, something that occasionally pops in my mind and I kind of cringe, like, oh, no. Oh, yeah, really? Those kind of things. And I might feel that I need to expand in those directions as well, or at least give them time. When we do both, I think it's a good balance.
Yeah.
That it's not hard work, suffering all day long. And it's not just the places that it's easier for me to go to the next level, which is challenging anyway. Those are the places. I would say that there are certain ways of being free by going away from something or something that disturbs you, to go beyond it, or there is certain things that is calling you to go towards it. And very large ways that I would say can make sense of our training, of our spirituality. And it's very true what you say, that our lifestyle, in any case, has the pros and cons. And we do have to make some kind of compromises and to live well within our cultures and within our worlds. And it might cost us, or it might take something from us. And many times it will not necessarily be the perfect, whatever perfect means. It's a bad word because I don't know even what it means. It will still challenge us. But even then, you might find yourself living, for instance, in today's world, people can travel and they find themselves in all kinds of funny places. The first few months might be very nice, it's new, it's fresh. And then after a while, you start to see the gray areas or the difficult areas. This happens everywhere. So you might decide to change apartment, but down the block, it will be more or less challenging in different ways. And this is something also wonderful for us as nomadic creatures, people that live maybe expatriates and outside of their home turf, where they also suffered a lot, but they tend to forget it when they go out because it looks so wonderful.
Yeah.
And then you can start to see in your own place, what are the places that are really itching? And where does it hurt and what does it mean? And how can I grow? Not just in my own being, but with my surroundings. And where does it trigger me, I would say. And then I see the trigger, and I can see if it's something that I want to address. Because some triggering is not so painful like others. Okay? So for instance, living in Germany, living in Berlin, and Berlin is a little bit like New York compared to America. So it's not real German, rural, traditional areas. But you can find some of the things concerning the mentality or the culture that it might be strange when you come from the outside. And some of them might be very triggering for people. For instance, the thing that there is a certain order. Some people go crazy. They just cannot stand it. And some of us, I can see, yeah, actually it's quite nice, I can learn to adapt and it's not such a big deal. For other people, order might be very scary and very traumatic, so they just cannot handle it. They will have to leave. It's not even a joke. It's like, no. It depends on the way things are done. So it's also our surroundings. It's also their interactions with people that we can be triggered by, and then we see, okay, do I want to expand this? Do I want to learn? Do I want to go to a mode of development? in a way, this is the place, and we can look at it from personal perspective and say personal development. I learned to adapt, and now my stuff is in order. There is Ordnung, yeah, and I learned to adapt, and I am well with it, and I expanded beyond my hippie, irresponsible way of being, and I learned something new. This expansion by itself sometimes also allows you this a little bit of a spiritual experience of, okay, I've grown, I've matured. Not necessarily by becoming old, but I've ripened. Yeah? And then it might allow me even to communicate with people around me within their spiel, within their game. So I become a new participant rather than a person that all the time reacts. It's like an allergy against the culture. So it's a very different experience there. I would look at it as being challenged as a human being. You spoke before very beautifully about finding peace. I would say the concept of peace is not static peace. It's not a permanent peace. You find your place, and it challenges you from within. And then you are at peace with your place, still being challenged by how do we expand from this place.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so this is part of the challenge here, and you can see also people moving to countries and they hate them. I've seen it very strongly in Switzerland. I was shocked. Really, was shocked to see people living there for many, many years and hating it. And it's a beautiful place, but there was something really disturbing, and they can really go against it constantly and still living there. So it's hell. It might have snow and beautiful forests, but you live an allergic reaction to the culture. So there is kind of compromises there, but you describe it more in practical terms. But if we look at it from the perspective of development and spirituality and expansion, it might show us the places that we wish to develop and to grow. And then we can also benefit the culture we are in from our perspective, while still talking to them from their own game. And still understand that every culture will have a game. And every culture will have certain rules of how to do things, even subcultures. And this is also interesting because if we imagine that we are able to go to create a new country, and there will be no games, and there will be no rules, and there will be no social structures, we start to see again how quickly those things happen.
Yeah.
And you are as if a Robinson Crusoe on your island, but you start to Europeanize.
You create your own games and play and rituals. And
yes. So the sheep will stand in line and the fence has to be clear. We have this Jewish joke about the Jewish Robinson Crusoe, that when they came to rescue him, he had 2 synagogues. And it's very typical Jewish. Because he said, this is the synagogue that I never set foot in. So you always have to have one synagogue where you go and another synagogue where you don't go, even if you live on a lonely island. And then you can start to say, wow, I'm really crazy. And your therapist most likely will tell you, wonderful, welcome home, you are crazy. Now let's start working on it.
You're alive.
You're alive. And this is the place that wow, I just woke up and I discovered this man, and take me away from this guy. And then you start to grow and unfold and develop. This is part of this spirituality. So the illusion that we can find a golden age, whether we had it and lost it, or whether we are going to have it, where there is absolutely no rules and no games and no stuff, I think is a spiritual delusion. We do need some kind of arrangement, a deal, like the social contract that we had since the French Revolution by Rousseau. It's a very interesting thing to look at it now and to reconsider it. But there will always need to be some kind of arrangement. The question is, where is the place of spirituality there? And I would love to see spirituality as part of the uniqueness of each citizen or person, participant, being able to expand, having the right, and benefiting from the richness of the diversity around. And it's not that there will be no rules, but it will be less of the issue, because the spirituality can develop within the rules. It can be independent from the rules, and hopefully the rules don't become too oppressive. But it's true what you said, that the first step of the monotheistic religions, Christianity, it happened long after the death of Jesus, much according to the Roman traditions, unfortunately. But in every religion there was a kind of a new game, a new deal of how society should run. And this is starting to build a new civilization. And it usually starts from the how to run the place. And here is the challenge. Let's say that our society is run well. What do we wish to do with our spirituality next morning? If it doesn't come to now fix, because it's fixed, where does it take me back to myself or to my loved ones and to my community to have spirituality ongoing? It's not just about running the society in a perfect way, and it's not just about me alone, but somehow working in this new space. This would be an interesting one, because usually it gets there that it starts to be the social game. This is how we live when we believe in that and this, and this is how it's supposed to be done.
Yeah.
And usually most of the energy goes there, and only some crackpots are starting to have visions, and they disturb the peace.
I think for today we can leave the audience with that question. For all of us to discover what is it that that we want in our lives, which directions we want to expand in, how would that look like, and how does that look like as an active participant in society, not alone, not outside of it. And then we continue the conversation another time, because we have approached 2 hours.
Oh, okay, sorry.
And I don't know how your schedule is today, but I do have to run soon.
Me too.
All right, then thank you so much. What an amazing conversation, and we'll continue this soon.
Happily, please.